I'm Kathy with the Delafield Quilt Company, and today I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on working with the layer cake mix recipes and cupcake mix recipes from Moda. Moda Cake Mixes, designed by Miss Rosie's Quilt Company for Moda, come in two basic different sizes. One would be the cake mix size, and then the other is the cupcake mix size. Cupcake mixes are used for charm packs. The cake mix recipes are used for layer cakes. Today I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how to use cake mix recipe number 9. When you get a cake mix recipe, it comes with 44 recipe cards. Each cake mix then allows you to create several different variations of blocks. These are just some of the examples that you can make with cake mix recipe number 9. I chose to go with this one for my cake mix recipe. The fabric that I'm using in this one is a Moda Layer Cake Bella Solids White. And then for the print, I'm using Garden Party from Kira Job Design Studio for Riley Blake. These are 10-inch squares that I'm using. The process of creating one of these recipe cards is pretty simple. You'll need 2 layer cake squares for each recipe card. One's going to be your print fabric and one's going to be your solid. You'll then lay these 2 squares right size together, lining up all of the edges. Once the edges are lined up, you're then going to place the recipe card right on top of it. You'll notice that the recipe card is 10 inches as well and should align with the edges of your layer cake squares. One of the tips I have for using these layer cake squares is to use flat-headed pins. These help not only secure your pieces together, but will also make it a lot easier when you go to actually cut these pieces out. So I'm going to put a pin in here. I'm going to put one up here as well. Now on this recipe card, there's a few things that I want to point out. You'll see different lines. Some are dashed with arrows and some are solid lines. The solid lines are your cutting lines. The dashed lines with arrows are the lines that you're going to sew along. So when I start sewing this with my machine, I'm going to make sure I know where the start is on each of these recipe cards. I have a start here, and then also a start down here. That's basically where you put your needle down, and then you're going to sew right on the dotted edge. Another tip for sewing with these layer cake recipe cards is to make sure you have a small stitch length. That's going to help a lot when you go to actually tear these pieces off. So once you start sewing, you're going to follow the line. You notice there's an arrow here that has you turning this piece in your machine. So once you get to that point, you'll lift up your needle, turn it, set it back down on the dotted line, and then you're going to continue following this. You also notice that they're in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that completes this. So we're going to sew around here, turn, sew, and then sew again. We're also going to sew this top part here. We're going to start at the start, sew on the dotted line, lift up our needle, turn it, put it back in, keep sewing, and then repeat the process until we've done all of the dotted lines. And that's it. That's all you need to sew for this template before you start cutting it. So I'm going to go and sew one, and I'll be right back. So now that you're at your sewing machine, you want to make sure you shorten your stitch length. I'm using a 1.8 for this one. And then you're going to insert the template right into your machine. You want to start again at the first start 1. I'm going to make sure that my needle is down on that star. Then I'm going to stitch right along with these dotted lines. Once you get to the end, you're going to lift up your needle and then you're going to turn the pattern. Again, lower your needle right where that dotted line meets the solid line. So now that I've got this sewn, I'm going to leave the pins in. And I just want to point out again that I used a really small stitch. I think I used a 1.5 or 1.8 on my machine. So leaving the pins in, and then need to grab my rotary cutter and my ruler. I found it's easiest to cut the outer lines first. So all these solid lines, I'm going to start cutting those. I'm going to use the guides on my ruler to line up with not only the edge I'm going to cut, but also the other edges to make sure that I'm nice and square on my cuts. And I'm just going to go up to the next cut here, being careful not to cut over this bottom line here. And then I'm just going to keep cutting around. And you can see these flat pins make it so much easier to use the ruler and keep the pieces together. Okay, now that I've got the perimeter cut, I'm going to cut the next biggest lines, and those are right down the middle here. And then I'm just going to keep cutting the next biggest lines I see until I've got all of these pieces cut out. Another tip I have for using these in wool with any foundation paper piecing project is to keep a separate blade just for these projects, because the paper on these can dull your blades faster than you'd like. And then when you go to use them on fabric, they may not be as sharp as you need them to be. Another, not so much a tip, but more of a common sense, is just make sure you have a garbage can near you, because there's going to be lots of little pieces. Okay, now that I got the outers and the pieces separated, I'm going to just keep continuing cutting the smaller pieces. It's also helpful too, when you get to these diagonal ones, to use the 1/4 inch mark on your ruler, line that over the stitching mark, and it should line up with the diagonal mark on the template. Okay, so now I got all the pieces cut out. I'm just going to sort them. And as you can see, you get a lot of pieces from really not that much sewing. I'm just going to organize these together. And there you have all these sewn pieces from just one template. In order to make this particular block, it's going to take 3 different layer cake recipe cards. Doing that allows the patterns to be mixed up a little bit, so you're not just sewing with the same pattern. From one of the recipe cards, I'm going to take the larger of the half triangle squares. From a different one, I'll take the smaller half triangle squares, and then from the third one I'll use the 2-inch squares. So I have the pieces laid out that I need. In addition to the recipe card, I also need a 3.5-inch square. This should match the smaller half triangle squares. In order to make this part of the block, I'm going to need to take the larger of the half triangle squares and cut them diagonally down the center. Once you have them all cut, match them up so you have the 2 prints on opposite sides. And then using a 1/4-inch seam allowance, we're going to sew these along the diagonal edge. Okay, once you have these all sewn together and pressed open, we can start laying out our pattern. I'm just going to use this other one as my example. Once you have your pieces lined up, go ahead and sew them starting with the smallest pieces first, and then you sew the blocks together and then your rows. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Delafield Quilt Company. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and picked up a few tips and tricks for working with the layer cake and cupcake mix recipe cards. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and check out our website at www.delafieldquiltco.com. Thank you.